Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Monday AlphaNooner. We are ready to kick off the week. We are very excited to be joined today to keep the cannabis conversation going with Sammy, the VP of Corporate Development at C21 Investments, here to kind of talk about what is going on as the cannabis landscape continues to develop, both from kind of a political perspective and just sort of a general player perspective. And then, of course, kind of talk through what is coming up in the rest of the year. I know there's a lot of unknowns that are still out there. None of us ultimately, I guess, know where things are going to land, but still interesting to talk through, important to kind of get that insight as we go along. So Sammy, thanks for joining us. I know we were chatting in the beginning.
How are you?
Doing great. I'm so glad to have you on. I think it's been we were talking obviously before, and it's been such a crazy week previously, on a top of some pretty crazy years, but I think some good things lining up.
Pile it on.
Keep it coming. But so yeah, there's always something to talk about, I know for sure. But maybe let's start with just kind of a temperature check as we're heading in. I know we're coming in towards the end of 2024 and 2020, heading into 2025. What's sort of your general high level temperature check?
I saw SAFE in the NBA this morning, and I know everybody had a moment.
I get it.
No, I mean it's. I can take a path where we can go down the potential glass half empty road or the glass half full road, because there's so many unknowns as to how we're going to get from where we are right now to where we want to get to. And obviously Florida A3 not passing was a blow to the industry. I've argued before, and I can continue the argument, that I think it was overstated as to how important it was for the industry. Obviously, it was going to be important for select companies, given how leveraged they are to the state. But I made the point months and months ago that Florida was essentially New Jersey and Illinois. And did New Jersey and Illinois, change the game for this industry? And, I would argue it hasn't. So that incremental kind of stair-step reform is, needed because we need growth. But we just, nobody's talking about Ohio, which we got a full quarter of.
Great numbers, yeah.
And 11 million population, and everybody has negative quarter over quarter growth. And you say, okay, Ohio didn't create the boost in growth, right? And if we used to see with New Jersey and Maryland and the states before, it would probably help the companies that were, going online in those states more than obviously the companies that aren't. But it didn't even fill in the leaking of the boat, right? Like, so you have to ask what's going on in the industry overall. Like, is there an existential crisis happening in cannabis? Is it as simple as hemp has proliferated into a $20 to $25 billion industry that is, eating our lunch? Or is there something else going on with the consumer? Is it inflationary kind of, pressures? So, and the answers for all these things are usually a bit of everything, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So, there is definitely some soul searching going on in the industry right now. And we saw some text for the Farm Bill this morning. I haven't had a chance to read through it too carefully, but I did see that they at least had the language in to close the loophole.
Which is surprising. I feel like most people didn't expect that to necessarily happen. I knew that there were some, worries around hemp and kind of how it was being used, and I think some responsible cases, but some, very non-responsible kind of uses for it. Were you surprised to see it looking like they're trying to, and again, it's not a done deal yet, but it's proposed to close?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen state attorney generals address this. I think in the spring, there was 21 of them that had sent a letter. So I think it's, it's floating out there that this is an issue that has to be addressed. The fact that I think there was two parts in it. One was that they were going to close the THCA loophole, and the other that they weren't going to allow industrial hemp to be used for, intoxicating hemp purposes. So, I mean, for the state legal industry, that would obviously be a great thing if we are losing, market share to, the gas station. Sure. The gas station weed, as we call it. Mm-hmm. The untested, unregulated, potentially unsafe, and I just read a report last night. I had actually put it up on Twitter from a nonpartisan Economic Institute had put out a, what is hemp doing to the cannabis market report. Take a look at it if you have time. I put it up last night for everybody. It had some really interesting graphs on like just Google search history of CBD versus THCA, and it essentially claimed in the report that there's a lot of quote unquote hemp operators that are essentially just selling cannabis and just circumventing essentially, right? So there's that kind of overall challenge for the industry. There's obviously a growth or stagnant as an industry, and the question is the industry growing, but we just lost all of that growth to hemp, or did inflation do a considerable number on our potential growth? The price compression has been a conversation that's been going on for a few years. Again, all of these things are probably factoring into why the industry is stagnant. So at the same time, I feel like you have what seems to be an incoming regime, right, with the appointments that are being suggested with Gates and RFK, and who knows how this is going to all shape up. But there is a path to, very potentially favorable reform for the industry in the near term, right? Whether that's seeing S3 to final, if we get a friendly AG like Gates, at the very least, I think he wants to deschedule cannabis. So at the very least, I think we're going to see S3 get to final. Yep. In that instance. He's very aware of safe banking and the need for capital markets reform. He's been a co-sponsor of safe banking since 2019. One thing I found doing when it came up that he was going to be the appointee, and I was looking at his history. In 2018, when Sessions ripped up the Cole memo, he actually tabled a bill right away to try to replace it and never made it through Congress. But just kind of tells you that he's really in tune. And if anybody saw him take down DEA Administrator Milgram in the House Judiciary Committee last year, right? He's very with it on this issue.
Yeah, I will say on cannabis, it seems like he's had that support and vocalized that support kind of generally even way earlier than a lot of people were catching onto cannabis and kind of understanding what it could do and, the safety versus things like alcohol, those things. But I think you're right. In the more near term, there has been action behind it as well, which has been obviously the key and missing ingredient on getting some change on the cannabis side of things.
And I know, if you look at Mace's bill, that, I'm sure they're going to try to retable that. I mean, there's all sorts of paths. And Mace's bill is essentially what we saw Trump say he supports, right? States' rights. So yeah. Is there a path for all these things? Of course there is.
Well, I was going to say, what's your take on, because I feel like it's been helpful, and I think it speaks to the issue of needing some better common sense approach to cannabis generally. But I think we do have all these different ways of kind of trying to attack it and trying to change it. Do you think that sort of without one clear, direct path on that way, that they kind of can tangle themselves up? And again, it's only speculation at this point, but what's sort of your
optimistic for the simple fact that we are in the final stages of rescheduling.
Okay.
Right. So I don't see any scenario if we do end up with a favorable AG, which it's appearing that's where we're headed, that's going to get tripped up at this point, other than it could get delayed with, lawsuits. Right. I mean, we're probably all expecting that, at least to slow down the process. And we'll see a lot more in the next month, right, with the preliminary hearing, December 2nd, December 5th. I always confuse the boys' date with the...
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's... Well, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure it's the second.
One is the second, one's the 5th.
Yeah. They're close, right around.
They're around the corner, a couple weeks away.
That's good.
So... It's optimistic. I think, there's a lot of arguing, at least in our little echo chamber, as to how important S3 is now, given that a lot of these companies aren't paying 280 anymore, or they all refiled and are, booking it as an uncertain long-term position. I can tell you for C21, for there's others, GTI, Verano, Planet, Cannabis. There's a bunch of companies that are still booking it as a current tax. And, in our case, we just paid $500,000 this quarter that we reported last week. And we paid $8 million in the last few years. And when you say, that's not that much. Well, we're a $24 million market cap. So if you said that in the last few years, we paid a third of our market cap in 280E, that's probably the highest percentage in the industry. So for a company like us, it's going to be transformational to not have to do that. And that's what we've paid. We've also kind of accrued about the same amount, if not a bit more, because the tax is so egregious on us, right?
Yeah.
So there's companies in the industry that don't book it. There's companies now that have refiled. Some have gotten some refunds. So it's how this is all going to shape up, given what the IRS has put out as a memo on how they still feel that it's applicable.
Yeah.
You know, GTI is obviously the bellwether in the industry for fundamentals and also for how they've handled 280E. They're the only one that's kept it current, paid their taxes. And so for someone like them, we already know what the difference would be because we can see what they pay.
Math it out. That is true. But again, I think it makes a difference in terms of, company size, how much you've been paying proportionally. That would be a big kind of uncapping of extra capital, which would be huge.
I've done the table. I just haven't shared it yet because there's a really dramatic difference between us and GTI and then some companies that aren't paying, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't, it's not a blanket S3 saves everybody.
Sure.
Obviously you stop, accruing it, even as an uncertain tax, you would stop accruing it. That's beneficial for everybody, right? So,
are you going to hold off posting it until after the second, or what's your?
How many tables I've done in the last year or two that I haven't put up because I just feel like
it's like jinxing it. But and until it happens, why look at it? But it also does feel like jinxing.
Federal reform is really what the entire industry is being driven by. So whether or not I show fundamentals, benefiting certain codes or the entire industry at large, it doesn't seem to
move the needle.
Last week we put out our Q2, which is everybody else's Q3 because our year end moved to March 31st. But we did 14% quarter over quarter growth. And that's essentially the best going on right now. I think Glass House also had double-digit growth, but really we were the only two. We also said in there that in October, which is the start of our next quarter, that the new store same-store sales was up another 14%. We had a really good quarter. Our EBITDA grew by $1 million, and we hit all-time lows last week after we announced that. So you kind of say, what does, there's such a disconnect right now between what these companies are and, how the markets are treating them. And I'm not saying some companies don't deserve necessarily to be down because maybe they had bad financials, but we're all in the same bucket, right? So there's no differentiation really for the most part. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, you're all just treated as there's no reform. You guys are all going down. Oh, reform happening. We're all going up. And
it's a roller coaster ride of it's either all great.
Last 3 years, just up and down roller coaster. If you think Mace's bill, she had tweeted that it was 3 years last week.
Anniversary,
when she announced that. And if you think of that, you had so much energy into the industry on that filing of that bill. And it feels like ever since then, everyone has a little bit less because how many times can you be head faked, right?
Which I think is good in some ways that hopefully there's less buildup around each coming potential catalyst or kind of junction point, because I think it does create less, fluctuations and kind of less disappointment. But I mean, I don't know. I keep saying it and I also feel kind of silly for saying it, but it does feel like just looking at the actual trends that we're seeing in terms of just like adoption. And I know there is a bit of a, consumer recession in terms of spending and being very careful with those dollars, which I totally understand. But the trend is moving in that direction. And I think you can only have bad and outdated laws in place for so long before something changes. But again, it has been much longer than we know.
Does S3 help adoption, normalization? Like all of those things, right? It becomes less taboo.
Yeah.
Maybe my parents or someone's grandparents who were less likely to try it as a Schedule I drug are, more likely to entertain it.
Yeah.
As a, whether it's as a replacement for chronic pain or sleep or all the potential health benefits that we, at least us in the industry are thinking have a very bright future for this plant, right? So, and obviously the research that gets unlocked,
Yeah.
Potentially with S3 and expedited at least. So,
A ton of reasons to do it.
It feels like, it's been a 6-year, a lot of these companies listed about 6 years ago or RTO'd or whatever. So it feels like it's been such a grind for such a long time, but in a lot of ways, the industry is just starting. It's it's the beginning.
Yep. No,
And I think it was Anthony Verrill at Dale's Report put it this way that I thought really stuck with me, that, we're building the plane as we fly it, right? Like, that's kind of what the industry is. It's the Wild West, and we're figuring it out as we go. And we're constantly having to navigate curveballs. And, if you think of the COVID, lockdowns, right? Like, us as a company in 2020, our stores were shut. We had to pivot to curbside, like, in 2 days, right? Mm-hmm. And like, if you look at those times, it's just like, and every time you feel like you've gotten past something, you get hit again with the next. If you go back even further, we had the vape crisis, right? Where there was the illicit market vapes that were causing some health problems in 2019, I want to say, that, at first was being blamed on the legal industry, right? Before it was kind of figured out that it wasn't.
I will say that's one of my biggest frustrations. I think that I tend to see a lot of the criticisms that are normally levied against the illicit market or sort of more just unregulated. I think ultimately it seems to be, that's what happened, I think, in Florida as well. It was the same thing where you're pointing a finger at the legal market for kind of the, not ills, but sort of looser regulation and looser attention, which I think is another frustrating thing. How do you, I know it's a silly thing, but what keeps you in it? Is it, do you just love solving creative problems? Is it, because that's hard over a long period of time. I think it's important to get people something that they need and want and enjoy.
I really believe in our company. Bruce and I are, I know you've had Bruce on, so our chairman, Bruce McDonald, we're still driven here. Sonny, as our CEO, I've never seen him more driven to kind of, let's go. We're in a really good place right now. I don't know if every company can say that.
Sure.
Benefits that we paid off the $30 million in senior debt, but the market doesn't seem to appreciate our position right now. And so we have to put our heads down and kind of continue to, build value and believe that that's going to be recognized at some point.
Yep.
We're the only company that has the same shares out as, all-time highs. We're the only company that paid off their senior debt. Like, I can go on the list of all these differentiating things about us as a small company. And there was always well, you're not growing. Well, now we're growing. And it's like, sure. Still not appreciated because we're too small. So it's, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. I think we have a model that really works. We, have thrived as a single state operator in Nevada. Our market share is growing. We're going to continue to do smart things, focus on accretive add-ons where we can, and wait for the industry to kind of have its opportunity, right? So
have it stay in the sun, yeah.
I think it's inevitable. None of us know if it's February or 26 or so, and for investors in the space, I kind of always try to remind people, make sure you're focused on, the health of the company you're investing in, whether it's us or, anybody else, because it's really hard with these kind of capital markets being so, starved essentially to, if you can't self-sustain, let's call it, from here to there, you can get yourself into trouble. And
for sure.
I think we've seen some of these smaller companies recently kind of have started to, fold. So it's, just make sure that you are fully on top of whatever you're investing in.
That is true. I was going to say, I feel like it's a boring thing that we say all the time, but it is so important and it does bear repeating, whether it's, ETFs or individual companies as well. It's the knowing what you own, understanding why you own it. All those things I think are always really important. And I think it's important to
kind of checking.
Checking. Yeah.
Having a regular health check.
Yeah. Things change. So you want to make sure that you're staying on top of it, especially in the best
order for a variety of reasons. I mean, the hurricanes that impact Florida obviously had some effect on their third quarters, right? So there are always instances that, can be explained, or just bumps bumps along the, trajectory. So it's, you have to take everything, you have to weigh everything in a more long-term lens.
Yeah.
I know it's hard because our markets in general are very short-term now and very, momentum focused. And obviously the momentum has not been with our industry in the last few years. So it's, and then you look at crypto or the other, the broader markets and at all-time highs, and it's what we're competing against, right? For that investor dollar. And it's always a challenge. So
yeah, that's true. Do you think, I mean, I know crypto and cannabis get lumped oftentimes together just because, again, they're kind of fighting against those sort of regulatory hurdles ultimately.
Yep.
Do you think we see something, again, it's hard to say, but like how much would you gauge them in terms of similarities with that? What's your take now versus, let's say, 2 years ago or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it's the regulatory unknowns
Sure.
that they share, and it's the speculative kind of investment, right? These are speculative industries. So, if we were up and they were down, then, we would be like, I can't explain to you why Bitcoin went from 16 to 92 or 3 as much as I can't explain why we're all down, what we're down. So, I mean, I can explain some of it because there's been fundamental challenges with the industry.
Yeah. I guess the question in some way is how much is that attributable, I wonder, as well, to sort of the Trump blessing? Because I think that has been given with cannabis, but has not shown up in the same way yet, potentially, that it has in crypto, which is interesting.
Maybe it hasn't been articulated clearly enough by
or enough. I think things take care repeating. I think it's one of those things. And I do think there is more.
His first message, the post, right? The post last month or whenever it was. I mean, it's a bit perfunctory. So we need to see more substance behind it. That being said, it's kind of the ideal layout for state legal cannabis, right?
Yeah.
Promising the safe banking, the capital markets, rescheduling, research, everything's kind of in there that you kind of say, this is ideal.
Yeah.
Let's wait and see if we get there.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm going to really quickly go through some comments as I'm seeing and/or questions, which are good. If you guys have any more, keep them coming. You are welcome to. Definitely interesting on Jane's point, which is, I think we've been talking about things moving kind of in a bizarre way, even kind of with the Chris Christie news versus the Gates news. I feel like things were kind of reversed on that. So
make any sense.
Kind of strange. But again, I think everyone talks about the plumbing and everything, but when things would get more normal, hopefully you would see kind of less of that weird kind of
I try to remind people and myself just, how bad the plumbing is regularly, because it's not the same. People always say, well, how did we go up in 2020 and 21? It's not the same. Like the custody situation now is far worse than it was then. And, whether it's the funds that got tapped out by their compliance departments or, Credit Suisse and JPM and all the, larger institutions that basically pulled custody, we're not in the same place anymore.
Yeah.
And look, the markets are, I put a post up last week about liquidity, and because a lot of arguments were, well, why didn't the TSX fix that for some of the companies that helped listed to the TSX? The liquidity isn't there. It's not in the Canadian markets at all. It's a fraction. It's a tiny fraction of what's in the, New York markets. So it is what it is until we can get there. And then we're seeing a bit of it with Agrify, right? With Ben's new name, right? Like, it's on fire.
Okay, that's good, because I was going to say, I think people think on a sort of better exchange that would sort of court more attention and more kind of investment potentially. But is that true? But I guess you're right. The Agrify kind of element maybe is
if the fundamentals don't backfill any. Ian Castle talks about this all the time. He's a great person to follow if you don't, on kind of microcaps in general. If the fundamentals don't backfill the moves, right, of companies, like, ultimately they're not going to sustain. So if Agrify doesn't show, and I don't know what their plan is, none of us do, right? But if they don't show kind of that growth and that plan to support going up 300, 400, 500%, then ultimately they're not going to stay there, right? So, and we saw that with the Canadian LPs, right? They all went on a crazy run as it got announced they were going to uplist, but then fundamentally most of them were broken. We're seeing some green shoots, I think, in Canada, with Rubicon and with Sundial and some of the things that these companies are doing, where they're starting to actually high tide, right? Sustainable businesses. It's good to see,
Yeah.
right? Because I think the failure of Canada and the LPs writ large, like I think it really impacted how much people thought MSOs were investable, right?
Yes. I do wonder if that's the same thing. Yeah. I do. I don't know what it takes to separate that from what could potentially happen on the US side for people who are looking at it or who will look at it if it, we do see uplisting and all these different things. I don't know how we undo that or kind of differentiate it enough to make it clear, hey, this is different. I don't know. I guess, again, we'll cross the bridge.
GTI's financials, and you'll know how different it is.
There you go. Fair enough. There you go. Yeah, maybe so, but not Canadians, and that's the key thing. All right, let me see what else is going on. El Guapo's in the mix. El Guapo. Love some Rodney Dangerfield, classic. Let me see. Jane was clearing up the ALJ, which is great. It is a second, and boys is
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you so much, always. Oh, and John had a question. So skipping way back, I know we were talking about the hemp changes kind of at the beginning. This was an interesting question around, will it be enforced? Because I think that is a big thing, because what makes it into law doesn't necessarily mean it is enforced. What's your...
How do you enforce it? Right, it's proliferated in most of the states that are still illegal, right? Georgia, North Carolina, like those kinds of states. Texas, huge market there. But even in some states like Florida, right, where there's a medical market, but it's everywhere. So how is it enforced? We're seeing how New York's been trying to enforce, and it's not easy, right? But that being said, Trump seems to be the kind of person that when he says, I'm going to do something, he tends to do it. So, and puts a lot of force into what he's trying to accomplish. So there, if there's a will, there's a way. We just won't know until, first off, they have to pass the bill with that language in it.
Yeah.
And the text that we saw today was Stabenow. She's the Senate Agricultural Chair. It's her version, right? So again, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the version that's passed. It's got to get through the House and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah.
It's still, again, it's a data point, but it is not the final. And even if it were the final, it is not passed. I think
I feel like the only one we know, with some certainty, if it can get to a finish line, is safe banking, because it's been around for so darn long, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on
it? Has such bipartisan support in both bicameral and bipartisan.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you think, I don't know, I know people are sick of hearing about SAFE and talking about SAFE or SAFER.
Yeah, I think we should just pretend like it's not an option in the NDA or the lame duck, and let the world be surprised if they found a way.
I think that's good. Consider it a bonus if we were to get it in. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, then it seems like, gaining certainty, but still a lot of uncertainty as we're kind of heading into 2025. You mentioned, running really a tight ship is important in terms of, financials and everything, and fundamentals is super important. Anything else that you guys are kind of, as you're looking into the next year, focused on, thinking of?
Yeah, we're active. We're on offense right now. Obviously with the constraints of the capital markets, we can't move as fast as we would like. But we are not going to slow down at all, depending on, the outcomes. I don't think, if there was a favorable outcome, I think it expedites how quickly capital markets kind of open up for these companies again. But given the current, say, status quo of Florida A3 failing and kind of, no path yet, we're going to continue to do what we do. We just kind of showed that for $3.5 million, we did a very accretive acquisition that's already on a $6 million run rate. And we're just going to kind of keep, doing what we do well. I don't think we could take on, a transformational large scale, M&A at this time.
But would you want to even? I think it doesn't feel like the time is.
The argument that every transformational large scale M&A in this industry has failed terribly. So maybe that's not this, and I always remind people too, look at GTI. When was the last time they did M&A?
Yeah. Right? Well,
they're the one that actually has the money.
Yeah. Well, I guess the Agrify deal, I guess you could count that, but within the cannabis space. Yeah. That's true.
In state legal cannabis, right?
Yeah, that's true. Choosing buybacks over something like that. Yeah.
using
That's
buybacks because they think that, and probably rightfully so, they think that their stock is cheaper than anybody else's that they can buy.
Then it should be. Makes sense. All right. Interesting. All right. Fair enough. I'm going to put you on the spot, which is, it's so unfair to guess. I think he's talking about safe. I don't know. I think that's a fair answer. I think, yeah.
I wouldn't bet on it.
That's fair. I think that's safe. It's good.
I hope I'm wrong.
Yes. But I think that's the right approach, is not playing that defense, but not getting hyped over safe particularly. I think it's focusing on the things that we are actively hearing about directly from the sources, again, like the new administration, what they're saying and what we actually see from that. Because I know
they're supportive of it, so it's fantastic. But we also know they're not actually in the office until late January. So
there's a lot of time between then and now. That's true. But again, it seems different than the Democrats coming in 4 years ago. So we'll see the approach and see if that's different. All right. Well, exciting. Thanks for kicking off the week.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here. What do you got planned for the rest of the day? Anything exciting? Any highlights?
I have
working.
Yeah, I have calls scheduled.
Love it.
And I have a sick little guy at home.
Oh, okay. I hope he feels better. But keep grinding hard. Thanks for making the time. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Really, really appreciate it. And
appreciate it.
Tomorrow. All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Ciao.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.